Hello, my name is Alan Dang, and I will be giving the presentation on Making Software Chapter 19, A Communal Workshop or Doors That Close by George Aranda. As a quick overview, I'll be talking about the different sections of the chapter: doors that close, a communal workshop, work patterns, and one more thing, and then I'll finish it off with my own conclusion. So the entire premise behind this chapter is answering the question, what is the most convenient office space layout for teams of software developers? Now the first section, doors that close, talks about how individual offices with actual doors that close will result in more productivity. The author makes the contention that developers work in a cognitively complex field. The tasks that they tackle are so abstract and so demanding that the distractions from typical settings can lead to fragmented concentration. Basically, if you're sitting in your cubicle and someone comes up to you and starts chit-chatting with you about lunch or how that party on Friday went, you're going to be distracted and you're not going to be able to focus on your programming. So giving the programmers the ability to isolate themselves will lead to fewer distractions, and that in turn will lead to a better flow, or the optimal state of concentration, where you're just coding and you're in the zone and it all comes easy. So the ideal workspace for this doors that close theory is a private office with, as we've said about 3 times, the door that actually closes. The ability for the programmer to mute his phone, to go offline, not be on instant messenger, Facebook chat, and just shut himself off from the world and work in isolation. This ideal space would also have access to shared meeting rooms and recreational spaces, which are essential for the mental health of the programmers. So in the book Peopleware by Tom DeMarco and Tim Lister, they talk about how they've implemented coding war games, or basically a competition between developers where they have some coding and testing tasks with time limits and defect limits. And what they've discovered is that there are huge differences in individual performance. And they said that when you measure the variations in the performance, you can count on the best person outperforming the worst by about 10 to 1. You can count on the best performer being about 2.5 times better than the median performer, and you can count on the half that are above the median beating the lower half by more than 2 to 1. So they found that the best performers couldn't be predicted by what language they used, by how many years of experience they had, by how much they got paid, or how many defects they had. The best predictor for performance was environmental factors, where they worked and how happy they were. So this table basically shows the environmental factors that these programmers had, and you can see the difference between the first quarter and the fourth quarter. Those that had more workspace performed a lot better. Quiet, private, isolated workspaces made a huge difference in how well they performed. Now, there's 2 conclusions to draw here. One is that a better workspace helps people to perform better. Or you could say that better performers gravitate towards companies that give a better workspace. Either way, it's worth your while to improve the workspace. Now in the DeMarco and Lister study, people who participated in the war games were given individual tasks, and they were rated individually. Now the problem with that is that software projects aren't usually done individually. Usually they're worked on by teams of software developers, and these teams of developers rely on constant coordination and communication. You can't shut yourself off in a room, in an isolated room, turn off your phone, like you could when you're doing the war games. You actually have to talk to the project lead and whoever you're working with. So the problem now is, what do we emphasize, coordination or concentration? Now, when you work closely together, you form a transactive memory system, which basically means that everyone knows what everyone else's area of expertise is. So you don't have to know everything. If Bob is good at Java, Bob can do all the Java work. If you're good at C, you can do all the C work, and you can be kind of modular about your software development. So on these team tasks, obviously a lack of immediacy is problematic. That face-to-face informal communication that's really important for teamwork is going to be lacking. If you're spread out among different countries, different states, even if you're spread out throughout the same building, your informal communication is going to decline. So team members even farther than 30 meters away are less likely to go and have an informal chat. So the study by Teasley found that war rooms or communal workshops had some benefit. Basically what the war room is a large communal workspace with some private cubicles nearby. It's a long, big desk with some whiteboards on the walls, and if team members need to find some isolation or they need to work on something in private, they could go into these cubicles with closed doors and take as much time as they needed. So the pilot teams from this Fortune 100 automobile company, they had great success with it. They outperformed the company baseline by over 2 times, and their subsequent teams that ended up using it performed even better. And for the most part, the developers really liked it. Of course, there's some people who didn't really like it, but the majority of them found that they were able to be more productive in these war rooms. Now, you might think that in a communal war room like this, the distractions would be greater because there's more people sharing the same space and all talking and everything. But the study by Chong and Sino found that the nature of the interruptions are different for pairs of software developers as opposed to individual software developers. So the paired programmers are more used to changes in volume, and they get interrupted less. Basically, they were able to give subtle hints to people who would come to interrupt them that they're working together. Maybe someone comes in to talk to one of the programmers but sees that they're talking to their partner and then decides to give them some time to finish. So this seems to indicate that a communal workshop, or a place where the entire team is co-located in the same room with the option to have privacy, is the best solution. So now let's talk about work patterns. So Tesla talks about how there's different levels of team workflow. There's the pooled workflow where everyone works individually and then at the end it's all put together. There's the sequential workflow where tasks are given from one member to another member, but they can't be given back to that same member. All the progress goes in one direction. There's the reciprocal workflow where tasks move from one member to another member, but they can go back to that same member. And there's also the intensive workflow, where the entire group has to collaborate together and work can move between all members at any time. So software projects tend to be more of the reciprocal and intensive workflows. Basically, the reciprocal kind of follows the waterfall and spiral models, and agile programming tends to follow an intensive workflow. So the intensive workflow projects require more coordination and group cohesion because they require a lot of collaboration between the entire group. It's not like the sequential and reciprocal workflows where one person does their part, passes it on to the next person. Everyone needs to be working together. So the war room is better for this kind of project. Basically, having everybody co-located in one room means that everyone can be on the same page and work together. Meanwhile, the sequential and the reciprocal workflow projects require less coordination, and there's a lot more emphasis on doing your specific part. So isolation, or doors that close, is better overall for this type of work pattern. Now the author points out that there isn't really a clear guideline to choosing an emphasis on isolation or an emphasis on co-location. It really just depends on what kind of development your team is going to do. Now the last section of the chapter is entitled One More Thing, and basically what this section is saying is that cubicles suck. The author says that cubicles give no benefits from either the co-location or the isolation approaches. They just provide the drawbacks. Cubicles don't give you good isolation, but they're not really shared spaces because they have those walls that separate you. It's all the distractions without any of the teamwork. So the conclusion that we can draw here from this entire chapter is that both isolation and co-location are important. So both the communal workshops and private work areas with doors that close are effective depending on what kind of project you're working on. If you're working on a project that has a lot of complex team dynamics, it requires a lot of coordination and cohesion, you're probably going to want a communal workshop or a war room. If you're working on a project that is very modular, has a lot of individual tasks to take care of, you're probably going to want a lot of isolated workrooms. Basically, pick anything but the cubicle. So personally, I agree with the author that isolation and co-location are important for different kinds of projects. I think it might be sort of intuitive that software teams should have a communal workspace with the option to go into a private area to get into the flow. So our projects that we're working on for this class are being done in groups of 2, so obviously there's not as much complex team dynamics at work here. So I think being isolated is going to be more beneficial for us working on our projects. We have our own set tasks that we need to accomplish, and while the face-to-face interaction is important, it's not as important as individual effort and getting into that optimal state of concentration. So my sources were the Making Software book, chapter 19, and also Dilbert.com for a few of these relevant comics. This concludes my presentation, and happy programming, guys.